She didn't even hit the floor before the diner froze because the man who'd been silently watching her for months finally stood up. Her toxic ex shoved her so hard the plates shattered. But when the Mafia boss stepped between them, the entire room held its breath. And the moment he whispered, "Touch her again and you'll disappear," nobody knew whether he meant a warning or a promise. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. You thought you could run from me, Chris? The words weren't a question. They were a snarl wrapped in ownership, delivered inches from the back of her head. The shove that followed was vicious, a hand clamping onto blonde hair, yanking downward before propelling her forward with brutal efficiency. Christina Bradley's tray lurched across the metal surface of the worker's diner counter. Rice scattered, broccoli slid, her palms slammed flat against cold steel, steadying herself with the quiet precision of someone who'd learned not to give predators the satisfaction of seeing her fall. She did not cry out. She did not beg. She merely absorbed the impact, exhaled slowly through her nose, and kept her gaze forward. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh white reality. The smell of grease and coffee hung thick in the air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Silverware froze mid-bite. The man towering behind her was a storm of rage compressed into a leather jacket. George Alex, mid-30s. Shoulders bunched with aggression. Jaw clenched so tight it looked ready to crack. His fingers were still twisted in her hair, knuckles white with the force of his grip. His name had once meant safety to her. Now it meant only survival. Thought you could embarrass me? George's voice pitched louder, demanding attention from every table in the diner. He wanted witnesses. He wanted submission displayed in fluorescent light and grease-stained tile. Thought you could just walk away and pretend I don't exist? Christina was wearing a fitted blue long-sleeve top, practical and unremarkable, the kind worn by someone who'd stopped trying to attract attention and started trying to disappear. Her blonde hair, the parts not gripped in George's fist, fell in waves past her shoulders, framing a face that bore no makeup, only the pale exhaustion of too many sleepless nights, and the contained fury of someone who'd stopped screaming and started plotting escape. Around them, the diner remained frozen. Construction workers with dirt under their nails stared from their booths. A waitress stood statue-still near the coffee station, pot trembling slightly in her grip. No one intervened. No one wanted to become George's next target. Two of George's friends lingered near the entrance, arms crossed, wearing matching smirks. They'd seen this before. They knew how it ended. George always won. "Let go of me, George," Christina said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. That small victory felt enormous. George's grip tightened instead, forcing her head back at an angle that made her neck scream. "You don't give me orders anymore, sweetheart. You don't get to decide when we're done." But someone else in that diner heard more than her words. At a corner booth near the window, a man in a charcoal suit straightened in his seat. Black shirt, no tie, collar open just enough to reveal the edge of dark ink crawling up his neck. His hands, decorated with tattoos that disappeared beneath expensive cuffs, rested flat on the table. His plate of food sat forgotten. His fork lay abandoned beside untouched chicken. His eyes, dark and predatory, tracked every movement of George's hands with the focused intensity of a wolf deciding exactly how to tear apart its prey. Hollis Montano had been watching Christina Bradley for 3 months. He knew she always sat facing the exit. He knew she wore long sleeves even in summer. He knew the way she flinched when men raised their voices, and the way she'd started to heal in the quiet safety of this neutral ground diner where nobody asked questions. And now he was watching someone destroy that safety. George yanked Christina's hair again, jerking her head back further. "You don't tell me what to. Take your hand off her." The voice cut through the diner like a blade through silk. Low, calm, absolutely lethal. Every head turned. George's face twisted with fresh fury, ready to demolish whoever dared interfere. He spun toward the voice, dragging Christina with him by her hair. Then he saw who was standing. Hollis rose with the unhurried grace of a man who'd killed before and would kill again without losing sleep. 6 feet of tailored menace, tattoos visible now at his collar and wrists, expression carved from stone and cold fury. His suit fit perfectly expensive, understated, the kind worn by men who didn't need to prove anything because everyone already knew. The entire diner held its breath. George's friends shifted nervously near the door. One whispered something urgent. The other paled visibly. George's grip loosened just slightly, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of an audience, not in front of his boys. This doesn't concern you, Suit. Walk away. Hollis didn't walk away. He took a step forward instead. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Christina's heart hammered against her ribs, but not from fear of George anymore. From the sudden, terrifying realization that the quiet man who always sat alone, who always nodded at her with respectful distance, who'd once helped her retrieve, dropped keys without saying a word. He was not a businessman. He was something far more dangerous. And he'd just decided George Alex had made his last mistake. Hollis's voice came again, quieter this time but somehow more threatening. You've got 3 seconds to remove your hand from her hair. George laughed. It sounded hollow even to his own ears. Or what? Hollis smiled. It was the coldest thing Christina had ever seen. Or you'll find out why people cross the street when they see me coming. George's laughter died in his throat. The diner wasn't silent anymore, it was suffocating. The kind of quiet that pressed against eardrums and made hearts beat too loud. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim, as if the building itself recognized the shift in power. Hollis took another step forward, closing the distance with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world because he owned every second of it. His shoes polished leather, expensive, clicked softly against the linoleum. Each footfall echoed like a countdown. George's fingers loosened in Christina's hair, not enough to free her, but enough to betray his suddenly uncertain grip on the situation. I said. Hollis repeated, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the chest. Let her go. Christina felt George's hand tremble against her scalp, felt the subtle shift in his posture, the micro-retreat of a bully realizing he'd miscalculated. But George's pride was a vicious thing. It had always been. You don't know who you're messing with, George snarled, trying to inject venom back into his voice. He released Christina with a shove, sending her stumbling to the side. She caught herself against a nearby table, breathing hard, free hand instinctively touching the back of her head where his fingers had been. George puffed his chest out, rolling his shoulders like a fighter entering a ring. His friends near the door perked up, sensing their cue. One cracked his knuckles, the other shifted his weight forward. Hollis didn't even glance at them. His entire focus remained locked on George with the intensity of a sniper lining up a kill shot. He stopped 6 feet away, close enough to strike, far enough to assess. His hands stayed at his sides, relaxed, tattooed fingers loose, posture deceptively casual. But Christina saw it. Saw the coiled violence beneath the expensive suit. Saw the predator calculating angles, weaknesses, how many bones he'd need to break to make his point. I know exactly who I'm messing with, Hollis said softly. George Alex. Small-time wannabe. Runs with the Northside boys. Thinks he's dangerous because he pushes women around in public and nobody stops him. George's face flushed red. You don't know shit about. You peaked in high school, Hollis continued, voice still maddeningly calm. You work construction when you're not drinking away your paycheck. You've got 2 assault charges that got dropped because your victims were too scared to testify. And you think that makes you powerful. The color drained from George's face. Christina stared at Hollis, mind racing. How did he know all that? How long had he been watching? And why? George's friends exchanged glances. The one near the door leaned toward his companion and whispered something urgent. The word Montano carried just loud enough. The second friend went pale and immediately backed toward the exit. George didn't notice. He was too busy trying to salvage his crumbling dominance. I don't care who you think you are. That's my girl. No. Christina's voice cut through, surprising everyone, including herself. She straightened from the table, trembling but standing. I'm not your anything, George. Not anymore. George spun toward her, fury reigniting. You don't get to... He took 1 step in her direction. Hollis moved. It wasn't a dramatic lunge or a telegraphed attack. It was efficient, brutal. Hollis closed the distance in a heartbeat, his hand shooting out to grip George's shoulder with crushing force, spinning him back around. George swung wildly, a haymaker born of panic and rage. Hollis didn't block it. He simply tilted his head 2 inches to the left. The fist sailed past his ear, disturbing nothing but air. Then Hollis moved again. His hand, tattooed, steady, terrifyingly precise, caught George's extended wrist mid-swing, twisted. One sharp, controlled motion, accompanied by a sound like a tree branch snapping in a storm. Crack. George's scream tore through the diner, high-pitched and agonized. He dropped to his knees, cradling his shattered wrist against his chest, face contorted in pain. Christina gasped, hand flying to her mouth. The remaining friend at the door bolted, the bell above the entrance jangling violently as he fled into the afternoon sunlight. Hollis crouched beside George, who was sobbing now. All bravado evaporated into pathetic whimpering. Hollis's expression hadn't changed. Still calm, still cold, still utterly in control. "That was for touching her," Hollis said quietly, so only George could hear, then louder for the room. "If you ever come near her again, I'll break the other one, and then I'll get creative." George nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. Cradling his ruined wrist, Hollis stood, straightening his suit jacket with one smooth motion. He glanced around the diner, making eye contact with the construction workers, the waitress, the cook visible through the kitchen window. Anyone have a problem with what just happened? Silence. Then, heads shook, gazes dropped, forks returned to plates. Normal conversation slowly, tentatively resumed, as if nothing had happened at all. Hollis finally turned to Christina. She was still standing against the table, eyes wide, breathing shallow, staring at him like she'd just watched someone split the sky open. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice for the first time gentled. "Just slightly. Just enough." Christina shook her head mutely. Hollis nodded once. "Good." He gestured toward an empty booth in the back corner, far from George's sobbing form. "Sit. I'll get you something to drink." And just like that, the most dangerous man Christina had ever encountered walked calmly to the coffee station, poured 2 cups, and carried them toward the booth like they were discussing the weather. George remained crumpled on the floor, forgotten. Christina's legs moved on autopilot, carrying her toward the booth Hollis had indicated. Her mind was a whirlwind of shock, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, mixed with a primal fear of the man who'd just shattered bone like it was nothing. She slid into the worn vinyl seat, her back instinctively finding the wall. Old habits. Always keep the exits visible. Always know where danger could come from. Except now, danger was sitting across from her, setting down 2 coffee cups with hands that had just destroyed another man's wrist. Hollis took the opposite seat, leaving respectful distance between them. He didn't crowd her space, didn't reach across the table, simply wrapped his tattooed fingers around his coffee cup and waited. Behind them, the diner manager, a tired-looking man in his 50s, had finally emerged from the kitchen. He took one look at George whimpering on the floor, glanced at Hollis, and immediately gestured to 2 busboys. "Get him out of here." Through the back, they hauled George up by his good arm, half dragging him toward the rear exit. He was still sobbing, cradling his wrist. All fight drained from him like water from a broken glass. The door swung shut behind them. The diner exhaled collectively and returned to the business of eating, as if violence was just another Tuesday interruption. Christina stared at her coffee. Steam rose in delicate spirals. Her hands shook too badly to lift the cup. "You've been coming here for 4 months, Hollis said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Christina's gaze snapped up. "You've been watching me." "Yes." No apology, no justification, just simple, unnerving honesty. "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended, edged with fear and anger and exhaustion. Hollis studied her for a long moment. His dark eyes, she'd thought they were black, but up close she could see flecks of deep brown, like expensive whiskey held something unexpected. Not threat, not possession, concern. "Because you always sit facing the door," he said simply. "Because you wear long sleeves in summer. Because 3 months ago, you came in here with a black eye covered in makeup, and you thought nobody noticed." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I noticed." Christina's breath caught. Her hand instinctively moved to her left eye, though the bruise had faded months ago. "That doesn't explain why you—" "I know what survival looks like," Hollis interrupted gently. "I know what it looks like when someone's running, when they're healing, when they're rebuilding themselves one quiet meal at a time in a place where nobody asks questions." Tears burned behind Christina's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She'd cried enough over George. She'd cried enough over everything. "So what? You decided to play hero? Break his wrist and ride off into the sunset feeling good about yourself?" Something flickered across Hollis's face pain. Maybe, or recognition. "No. I decided that if he ever came near you again, he wouldn't walk away." The certainty in his voice sent ice down her spine. "You don't even know me," Christina whispered. "I know enough." "You know nothing." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "You don't know what I—" She stopped, swallowing hard against the rising tide of emotion. "You can't just break someone's bones because—" "He put his hands on you." Hollis's voice remained calm, but something deadly crept into the edges. He grabbed your hair, he shoved you. He humiliated you in front of everyone because he knew nobody would stop him. He leaned forward slightly, not threatening, but intense. I stopped him, by breaking his wrist. Would you prefer I killed him? The question hung in the air like smoke. Christina stared at him, searching for a joke, a bluff, anything to suggest he wasn't serious. His expression didn't change. Oh my God, she breathed. You're serious. You would've… Yes. No hesitation, no doubt. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot. Christina pressed her palms flat against the cool table, anchoring herself. Who are you? Someone who doesn't let men like George walk away unpunished. That's not an answer. Hollis tilted his head slightly, considering. Then he extended one tattooed hand across the table, palm up, unthreatening. Hollis Montano. Christina stared at the offered hand. At the intricate ink decorating his knuckles, symbols she didn't recognize. Designs that spoke of a life she couldn't fathom. She didn't take it. I've heard that name, she said slowly, trying to remember where. Whispered conversations, news reports, something about organized crime, and her eyes widened. You're that Montano? Yes. She couldn't even finish the sentence. Mafia boss, he supplied calmly, withdrawing his hand. Though I prefer businessman. Christina's heart hammered against her ribs. She should run. She should grab her purse and sprint for the door and never look back. She'd just escaped one dangerous man. She couldn't afford to let another one into her life, no matter how he'd helped her. But her legs wouldn't move, because despite everything, despite the broken wrist and the cold efficiency and the casual admission of what he was, Hollis Montano was still sitting across from her with patient, careful distance. Not demanding, not taking, just present. You should be afraid of me, Hollis said quietly, reading her face. Most people are. Christina lifted her coffee cup with trembling hands, took a sip, and met his gaze over the rim. I've been afraid for 2 years, she said. Fear doesn't impress me anymore. For the first time since she'd met him, Hollis Montano smiled. It was small, barely there, but genuine. The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the careful neutrality Hollis seemed to wear like armor. He leaned back in the booth, creating even more space between them, as if he understood that proximity to him was a kind of danger all its own. You should still leave, he said. Go home. Lock your doors. George won't come back tonight, but he's got friends. Stupid ones. Christina set her coffee cup down with more force than intended. I'm not going home. Then where? I don't know. The admission tasted like failure. Somewhere he can't find me, again. Hollis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. How long have you been running? 7 months since I left. 2 years before that, trying to survive living with him. The words came easier than she expected. Maybe it was the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Maybe it was the strange safety of confessing to someone who'd already seen her at her most vulnerable. I thought I'd gotten far enough this time. Changed my phone number, stayed off social media, paid for everything in cash. He tracked you through your car registration, Hollis said. Or a friend who still has your number. Or he's been watching this diner because it's on your route from work. Christina's stomach dropped. How do you… Because that's what men like him do. They don't let go. They don't move on. They obsess. His fingers drummed once against the table, the only sign of agitation he'd shown. Where do you work? The medical supply warehouse off Highway 9. Third shift inventory. He knows. How could he possibly… Because he's been following you. Hollis's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical almost, like he was diagnosing a problem. He knew you'd be here today. He came prepared with backup. That wasn't random, Christina. That was planned. Hearing her name and his voice low, careful, strangely intimate, sent an unexpected shiver through her. You can't know that. I know men like George. Hollis's eyes darkened. I've dealt with them my entire life. They're predictable. They're weak. And they're dangerous precisely because they're desperate to prove they're not. The diner door chimed. Both of them tensed. But it was just an elderly couple shuffling in for an early dinner, the woman clutching her husband's arm for balance. Christina released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. You can't live like this, Hollis said quietly, looking over your shoulder, jumping at every sound. I don't have a choice. You do now. She met his gaze warily. What does that mean? Before he could answer, the back door of the diner burst open. George stumbled through, his good hand clutching a tire iron, face twisted with rage and pain and humiliation. His broken wrist hung uselessly at his side. but fury had overridden the agony. "You think you can just—" he screamed, charging straight toward their booth. Christina gasped, pressing back against the wall. Hollis didn't stand. Didn't even turn around fully. He simply raised 2 fingers and snapped them once. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. 2 men materialized from a booth near the front. Christina hadn't even noticed them before. But of course they'd been there, watching, waiting. They wore dark shirts and darker expressions, moving with synchronized efficiency that spoke of military training or something worse. They intercepted George 3 steps from the booth. One caught his good arm in a lock that dropped him to his knees instantly. The other kicked the tire iron away, sending it skittering across the linoleum with a metallic screech. George howled rage, pain, impotent fury all tangled together. The entire diner froze again. Forks suspended. Conversations died. Hollis finally stood, straightening his suit jacket with careful precision. He walked around the booth slowly, stopping in front of George's kneeling form. His men held George firmly but didn't inflict additional pain. They didn't need to. Hollis crouched down, bringing himself eye level with George. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that Christina barely heard it. "I broke your wrist as a warning. You came back with a weapon. That was your second mistake." George spat at him. The glob of saliva landed on Hollis's expensive leather shoe. The temperature in the room plummeted. Hollis stared at his shoe for a long moment. Then he looked up at George with an expression that made Christina's blood run cold. It wasn't anger. Anger was hot, impulsive, human. This was something else entirely. "Take him outside," Hollis said to his men. "Both of you. Make sure he understands the terms." "What terms?" George snarled, still defiant despite everything. Hollis stood, brushing an invisible speck from his jacket. "You're going to leave this city. Tonight, you're going to tell your friends that if they come near Christina Bradley, they'll answer to me personally, and you're going to understand, truly, deeply understand that the only reason you're still breathing is because she asked me not to kill you." He glanced back at Christina, something unreadable in his eyes. Then back to George. "If I see you again, her mercy won't apply. Do you understand?" George tried to maintain his glare, but his body betrayed him shaking, sweating, the bravado crumbling under the weight of genuine terror. "I said." Hollis's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire space. "Do you understand?" "Yes," George choked out. "Yes. Good." Hollis nodded to his men. They dragged George toward the back exit, his protests fading into the alley beyond. Hollis returned to the booth, sitting down across from Christina as if nothing had happened. "You were saying something about not having choices," he said calmly, picking up his coffee cup. "I disagree." Christina couldn't breathe. The air in the diner felt thick, suffocating, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Her hands trembled violently now, no longer just from residual adrenaline but from the full crash of everything that had just happened. George had come back with a weapon. Hollis had men stationed throughout the diner watching, waiting, protecting her, without her even knowing. And now George was being dragged into an alley where God knows what would happen to him. "I need," she gasped, pressing her palm against her sternum. "I need air. I can't." Hollis was moving before she finished the sentence. He slid out of the booth and positioned himself beside her, not touching, never touching without permission, his presence solid and grounding. "Breathe with me," he said quietly. "In through your nose. 4 counts. She tried. Failed. Her lungs wouldn't cooperate. "Christina." His voice cut through the static in her brain, firm but gentle. "Look at me." She forced her eyes to his. Dark, steady, completely calm in the center of her hurricane. 4 counts in, he repeated. "Hold for 4, out for 4. With me," he demonstrated, his chest rising slowly, visibly, giving her something to follow, something concrete to anchor to. Christina inhaled shakily. 1, 2, 3, 4. Held it. The trembling eased slightly. Exhaled. 4 counts. Slower. Again, Hollis instructed. They breathed together, this dangerous stranger and this broken woman in the corner booth of a worker's diner while life continued around them. After the 5th cycle, Christina's vision cleared. The crushing weight on her chest loosened enough that she could think again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't usually. Don't apologize." Hollis's voice held an edge of something fierce. "You just watched your abuser attack you twice in 10 minutes. You're entitled to whatever you're feeling. What are they doing to him?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Teaching him a lesson he should have learned years ago. "Are they going to kill him?" Hollis held her gaze. Do you want them to? The question hung between them, honest, direct, devoid of judgment. Did she? 2 years of cruelty, of walking on eggshells, of makeup covering bruises and excuses covering fear, of nights spent locked in the bathroom while George raged outside, of the slow, systematic destruction of everything she'd once been. Did she want him dead? No, Christina said finally, and meant it. I don't want his blood on my conscience. I just want him gone. Something softened in Hollis's expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. Then he'll be gone, he said simply. By morning, George Alex will be on a bus to another state, with very clear instructions about what happens if he ever comes back. Just like that? Just like that. Christina laughed a hollow, broken sound. You say it like it's easy, like you can just erase people from existence. I can. No boast, no bravado, just fact. The reality of who she was sitting with crashed over her again. Hollis Montano. The name she'd heard whispered in news reports about organized crime. About territories and protection rackets and bodies that disappeared. Why are you helping me? She asked, voice cracking. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why risk? She gestured vaguely at the space where George had been. All of this for a stranger? Hollis was quiet for a long moment. His tattooed fingers wrapped around his coffee cup, thumb tracing the rim in slow, measured circles. My mother, he said finally, voice low. She wore long sleeves in summer too. Christina's breath caught. My father thought his fists were the best way to communicate. Thought ownership and love were the same thing. Hollis's jaw clenched. I was 12 when I finally got big enough to make him stop. 15 when I made sure he never touched her again. What did you do? What needed to be done? The weight of those words settled between them. Christina understood what he wasn't saying. What he'd done to protect his mother. What he'd become in the process. She's safe now, Hollis continued. Has been for 20 years. Lives in a house I bought her in the mountains. Doesn't wear long sleeves anymore unless she wants to. His eyes lifted to Christina's. I couldn't help her sooner. I was a kid, powerless. But you're not powerless now. No, I'm not. Christina felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. Not the violent sobs of breakdown, but the quiet tears of someone finally being seen. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I didn't ask to be saved. I know. I don't want to owe you. You don't. Then what do you want from me? Hollis leaned back slightly, giving her space. His expression impossibly gentle for a man who just orchestrated violence with a snap of his fingers. I want you to finish your dinner, he said. I want you to stop looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds. I want you to sleep through the night without nightmares. He paused. I want you to have the chance my mother didn't get for too many years. The chance to heal without fear. Christina stared at him, this contradiction of a man. Monster and protector, killer and guardian. How long have you been coming to this diner? She asked. 3 years. It's neutral ground. Safe. For who? For everyone who needs it to be, including her, apparently. Christina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a shaky breath, and reached for her coffee cup. It had gone cold, but she drank it anyway, needing something normal, something ordinary. My dinner's ruined, she said, glancing at her abandoned tray still sitting on the counter. Hollis stood smoothly. I'll get you a new one. What do you want? And somehow, impossibly, that question broke her more than anything else had, because no one had asked her what she wanted in so long. Outside, in the narrow alley behind the diner, George Alex was learning what real fear felt like. The 2 men holding him weren't rough. They didn't need to be. They'd positioned him against the brick wall with professional efficiency, one gripping his collar, the other standing just close enough to block any escape route. George's broken wrist throbbed with every heartbeat, sending waves of nausea through his system. The tire iron lay somewhere behind the dumpster, useless now. His backup, the friends who were supposed to help him teach Christina a lesson, had vanished the moment Hollis's name was mentioned. You don't understand, George panted, trying desperately to inject authority back into his voice. That's my girlfriend in there. This is between me and her. You got no right. The man on his left, Latino, early 30s, scar cutting through his eyebrow, laughed without humor. Your girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, the other corrected. He was younger, maybe mid-20s, with the cold eyes of someone who'd seen too much too early. The woman you assaulted, twice, in front of witnesses. I didn't assault, she's being dramatic. She always... The younger one moved fast, slamming George harder against the brick. Not enough to injure, just enough to shut him up. "You put your hands on her," he said quietly. "You grabbed her hair. You shoved her into a table. You came back with a weapon." Each statement was delivered like a prosecutor reading charges. "You know what Mr. Montano does to men who hurt women?" George's mouth went dry. He'd heard the name Montano before. Everyone in the city had. Whispered in bars. Mentioned in news reports that never quite led to arrests. The kind of name that made people nervous, that cleared rooms, that meant power and danger and connections that ran deeper than law enforcement could reach. But George had been too angry to care. Too focused on Christina and her betrayal and his wounded pride to think about who might be watching. "I didn't know," George stammered. "I didn't know she was. Is she his? Is that it? Because I swear, man, I didn't know she belonged to. She doesn't belong to anyone." The older one's voice was sharp. "That's your first problem. Thinking women are property. I just meant, we know what you meant." The back door opened. George's heart seized, expecting Hollis, expecting execution, but it was just a busboy emptying trash, who took one look at the scene and quickly retreated inside. "Smart kid. Here's what's going to happen," the younger one said, releasing George but staying close enough to grab him again if needed. "You're going to listen very carefully because Mr. Montano doesn't repeat himself, and neither do we." George nodded frantically, cradling his wrist. "You're leaving Phoenix, tonight. There's a bus station 6 blocks from here. Greyhound departs for Albuquerque at 9:15. You'll be on it. I can't just leave. I have a job. You had a job." The older one pulled out his phone, scrolled briefly, then turned the screen toward George. "You've been terminated. Effective immediately. Severance pay deposited in your account. Your landlord has been notified you're breaking your lease. No penalties." George stared at the email on the screen, official company letterhead, his supervisor's signature, dated 20 minutes ago. "How did you... Mr. Montano has resources." The phone disappeared back into his pocket. "Your apartment will be cleared out by tomorrow. Your belongings will be shipped wherever you end up. Albuquerque, Tucson, El Paso, we don't care. As long as it's not here. You can't just... We can. We did." The younger one leaned in closer. "Here's the important part, George. The part that determines whether you see your next birthday. You will not contact Christina Bradley. Not by phone. Not by email. Not by letter. Not through friends. Not ever. But you will not return to Phoenix. Not for holidays. Not for family. Not for funerals. This city is closed to you." George's legs felt weak. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. "And if you talk, if you go to the police, if you tell your buddies about Mr. Montano, if you try to be a hero," the older one smiled, and it was the coldest thing George had ever seen. "Well, let's just say your wrist will be the least of your problems." "What does that mean?" Neither man answered. They didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. "There's a second option," the younger one said conversationally. "You can refuse. You can stay in Phoenix. You can try to see Christina again." Hope flickered in George's chest. "Yeah? And Mr. Montano will kill you." The hope died instantly. "Not quickly," the older one added. "He's very creative when he's motivated. And hurting women? That motivates him." George's knees buckled. He slid down the brick wall, landing hard on the grimy asphalt, his broken wrist screaming in protest. "Why?" he whispered. "Why does he even care? What is she to him?" The two men exchanged glances. "Someone under his protection now," the younger one said. "That's all you need to know. Bus leaves at 9:15, the older one repeated. "Don't miss it." They turned and walked back inside, leaving George alone in the alley with his shattered wrist, his shattered pride, and the terrifying understanding that he'd made an enemy who could erase him with a phone call. Inside the diner, Christina was eating fresh chicken and rice that Hollis had brought her, unaware that her nightmare was being systematically dismantled in an alley 20 feet away. George stayed slumped against the wall for another 10 minutes, crying, before finally dragging himself upright and stumbling toward the bus station. He'd be on that 9:15 Greyhound. He'd never come back to Phoenix, and he'd never, ever forget the name, Hollis Montano. The two men returned through the back door, their expressions neutral but satisfied. They moved through the diner with the easy confidence of soldiers returning from a successful mission, stopping briefly at Hollis's booth. The older one leaned down, speaking quietly enough that Christina couldn't hear. Hollis listened, nodded once, then dismissed them with a subtle gesture. They disappeared as seamlessly as they'd appeared. Christina pushed rice around her plate, appetite gone despite the fresh food. Is he? Alive, Hollis confirmed. On his way to the bus station. Just like that. Just like that. She set down her fork. What did you do to him? Hollis studied her for a moment, seeming to weigh how much truth she could handle. What he deserved. What he needed to understand that his actions have consequences he can't bully or charm his way out of. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. The honesty surprised her. She'd expected deflection, maybe lies designed to protect her from the ugliness. But Hollis offered neither comfort nor deception. I need to know, Christina pressed. If you're going to. She stopped, unsure what she was even asking. I need to know what happened to him. Hollis leaned back, his tattooed fingers lacing together on the table. George is leaving Phoenix tonight. He won't come back. He won't contact you. He won't send friends or family or strangers to check on you. As far as your life is concerned, he no longer exists. How can you guarantee that? Because I've made it very clear what happens if he doesn't comply. Christina's stomach twisted. You threatened to kill him. No. Hollis's voice was precise, clinical. I promised to kill him. There's a difference. The casual certainty of it should have terrified her. Should have sent her running from this booth, this diner, this man who spoke about murder like other people discussed the weather. But instead, she felt something else entirely. Relief. And that realization was almost more disturbing than anything else. What else? She asked quietly. There's more. I can see it in your face. Hollis's expression flickered surprise. Maybe, that she could read him. George had debts. Small ones. The kind that get ignored because he had friends who vouched for him. Those debts are no longer small, and those friends are no longer vouching. You made him owe money? I made sure the money he already owed became a priority. And I removed his protection. Hollis's eyes darkened. In certain circles, being under someone's protection is the only thing keeping you safe. George no longer has that privilege. Christina processed this slowly. So even if he wanted to come back, he'd be walking into a city where half the underground has been told he's fair game. No protection, no sanctuary, no second chances. That's... She searched for the right word. Cruel, excessive, brilliant, thorough. It's necessary. Hollis's voice hardened. Men like George don't stop because you ask nicely. They don't learn from restraining orders or court dates or second chances. They only understand power. And they only stop when someone with more power makes them. Is that what you are? More powerful than him? Yes. No hesitation, no false modesty. Christina wrapped her hands around her water glass, needing something solid to hold. My whole life I've been told that violence isn't the answer, that there are proper channels, police, courts, restraining orders. How did those work for you? The question landed like a physical blow, because the answer was, they hadn't. She'd filed a police report once. George had charmed the officers, convinced them it was a domestic dispute, nothing serious. She'd tried to get a restraining order. George had friends in the courthouse who delayed the paperwork until she'd given up in exhaustion. The system that was supposed to protect her had failed at every turn. I feel like I should be horrified, Christina admitted. You broke his wrist. You're forcing him out of the city. You've essentially put a target on his back if he ever returns. But you're not, Hollis observed, horrified. No. The word came out as a whisper. I'm relieved. And that makes me feel like a terrible person. Hollis reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away, and placed his hand palm up on the surface between them. An offer, not a demand. You're not terrible, he said quietly. You're human. You spent years being hurt by someone who was supposed to love you. Feeling relief that he can't hurt you anymore doesn't make you a monster. It makes you a survivor. Christina stared at his hand, at the intricate tattoos covering his knuckles, at the scars that spoke of violence both given and received. This hand had broken George's wrist less than an hour ago. This hand belonged to a man who'd orchestrated the destruction of someone's entire life with a few phone calls. And yet, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers gently, warmly, with a care that contradicted everything he was. What happens now? She asked. Now you finish your dinner. Then you go home and sleep without checking the locks every 10 minutes. Tomorrow you go to work without wondering if he'll be waiting in the parking lot. Hollis's thumb traced a gentle arc across her knuckles. You start living instead of surviving. Just like that. Just like that. Tears slid down Christina's cheeks, not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming weight of hope. Fragile, terrifying hope. I don't know how to do that anymore, she confessed. Hollis squeezed her hand once, firmly. Then I'll teach you. The silence in the booth stretched between them, thick with unspoken history, and the ghost of George's sobs still echoing from the alley. Christina stared at her hands, pale against the chipped formica, watching as the tremors gradually subsided. The adrenaline was draining from her system, leaving behind a hollowed-out exhaustion she knew all too well. Hollis hadn't moved. He sat with a stillness that felt ancient, patient, giving her space to breathe, to think, to exist without expectation. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold beside him. Why did you help me? The question slipped out, quieter than she intended. She hadn't meant to ask it, not really. But it had been circling in her mind since the moment he stood up, a relentless, unanswerable thing. Hollis didn't answer immediately. His dark eyes studied her face, not with pity, not with predatory interest, but with a focused attention that felt like being truly seen for the first time in years. You didn't break, he said finally, his voice a low rumble in the quiet space between them. Even when he had his hands in your hair. Even when he shoved you. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You steadied yourself and took it. He tilted his head slightly. Most people break. You absorbed the impact. There's a difference. Christina let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. That's not strength. That's survival. You learn not to give them the satisfaction. Same thing. No. She shook her head, tears pressing hot against the back of her eyes. Survival is just enduring. Strength would have been leaving sooner. Strength would have been pressing charges when he broke my rib. Strength would have been telling someone when he locked me in the closet for a day because I talked to a male coworker. The words were pouring out now, a dam cracking after years of pressure. I didn't do any of those things. I just survived. Hollis's jaw tightened. A muscle flickered near his temple. How long? 2 years, 7 months, and 13 days. The numbers came automatically. She'd counted every one. The first 6 months were okay. Charming, even. He brought flowers, remembered my coffee order, called me every afternoon just to hear my voice. She traced a scratch on the table, then I missed a call because I was in the shower. He showed up at my apartment, demanded to know who I was with. When I showed him the wet hair, the towel, he didn't believe me. That was the first time he grabbed me. Not hard, just a firm grip on my arm, a reminder to keep my phone closer. She risked a glance at Hollis. His expression was carved from stone, but his eyes, they burned with a cold fire that made her shiver. It escalated slowly, she continued, the story unfolding like a nightmare she'd rehearsed in her head 1,000 times. A shove here, a cruel comment there. Isolating me from my friends, they were bad influences. My family lived out of state, so that was easy. Quitting my job because my boss was too friendly. He wanted me dependent. On him. For everything. The black eye? Hollis asked, his voice dangerously soft. Christina's fingers drifted to her cheekbone. 9 months in, I used my emergency cash to buy a bus ticket to my sister's. Got as far as the terminal. He found me. Said he'd tracked my phone. Dragged me back to the car. I fought that time. Really fought. She swallowed. He backhanded me. Told me I'd earned it. That if I ever tried to leave again, he'd make sure my sister regretted helping me. The diner around them continued its mundane rhythm, forks scraping plates, the hiss of the grill, low chatter. The normalcy of it felt surreal, a stark contrast to the confession staining the air between them. I left 7 months ago, she whispered, in the middle of the night. Took nothing but a backpack, changed my appearance, cut my hair, dyed it blonde from brown, used cash for everything, got the warehouse job under a fake last name, moved into a weekly motel. I thought I was finally far enough away, that he'd give up. Hollis's hands, resting on the table, had curled into loose fists. The tattoos on his knuckles seemed darker, more pronounced. He didn't. No. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. He never gives up. It's not about love. It's about possession. I was his thing, and you don't let your things just walk away. For a long moment, Hollis said nothing. He looked past her, out the diner window to where the afternoon sun was beginning to soften into evening. His profile was sharp, all angles and severity, but the rage she saw simmering beneath the surface was a living thing. My mother, he began, and the shift in his tone from cold observation to something raw and personal startled her. Her name was Elena. She had a laugh that could make you smile even on the worst day. He paused, as if the memory was both a comfort and a wound. My father, he thought laughter was a challenge, thought gentleness was weakness. He'd come home smelling of whiskey and other women, and if dinner wasn't perfect, if the house wasn't spotless, if she looked at him wrong. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I was 12 the first time I stood between them. He continued, his gaze returning to hers. He backhanded me into a wall, broke my collarbone, told me to learn my place. A humorless, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. I learned. By 15, I knew how to make a man disappear. By 17, I had a reputation. By 20, I owned the reputation. And my father, he had an unfortunate accident, a fall down a very long flight of stairs. Christina's breath caught. She should be horrified, but all she felt was a fierce, terrible understanding. I got her out, he said, the words stark and simple. Gave her a new name, a new life, a house with a garden where she grows roses. She doesn't jump at slamming doors anymore. She sleeps through the night. His eyes held Christina's with an intensity that pinned her to the seat. But I was too late to prevent the scars. The flinches, the long sleeves. In July, I carry that, every day. He leaned forward, just an inch, his voice dropping to a vibration she felt in her bones. When I saw you 3 months ago, with that poorly concealed bruise, and those tired eyes, sitting here trying to remember how to eat a meal without looking over your shoulder, I saw her. Not in your face, in your spirit, in the way you were trying to piece yourself back together in this quiet, greasy spoon where nobody asked questions. He held her gaze, and I decided that if that piece of shit ever showed his face here, I would make sure he never showed it anywhere again. The confession hung between them, vast and terrifying and profoundly tender. Christina felt something crack open inside her chest. Not a breaking, but an unlocking. A vault of fear and loneliness she'd sealed shut years ago, swung open, and for the first time, someone was looking inside and not turning away in disgust or helpless pity. I don't want to be a project, she whispered, her voice thick. I don't want to be a redemption arc for a dangerous man. Hollis actually chuckled, a low, rough sound. You're not. This isn't about my redemption, Christina. I'm past that. This is about a simple equation. You needed protection. I can provide it. He deserved punishment. I can deliver it. And what do you get from this equation? He considered her. The satisfaction of knowing one less woman has to look at her reflection and see shadows where there should be light. It was too much. The kindness, the violence, the brutal honesty all woven together into a man who was both monster and guardian. The tears came then, not the silent tracks of before, but quiet, shaking sobs that she muffled with her hand. She cried for the 2 years she'd lost, for the woman she'd been before George, for the exhausting relief of not being alone in this anymore. Hollis didn't touch her, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just waited, a solid, immovable presence across the table, until the storm passed. When she finally looked up, eyes swollen and raw, he pushed her water glass closer to her. Drink. She obeyed, the cool water soothing her ragged throat. You are not alone anymore, he said, and the words were not a comforting blanket, but a statement of fact, as concrete and unshakable as a law of nature. You have a choice now. You can walk out of here and go back to looking over your shoulder, hoping he listens to my warning, or you can accept my help and know, with absolute certainty, that you are safe. He let the offer sit, heavy and real, between them. Christina Bradley, who had spent 2 years, 7 months, and 13 days making herself small and quiet and invisible, looked at the most dangerous man she had ever met and felt, for the first time in all those days, a spark of something that felt like power. What does your help look like? She asked, her voice clear. Hollis Montano's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was its own kind of promise. It looks like freedom. The finality of Hollis's offer lingered in the air, a tangible thing between them. Freedom. The word tasted foreign on her tongue, like a language she'd once known but forgotten. The weight of it was terrifying. Freedom meant choices. Choices meant the potential for new mistakes, new dangers. But it also meant a life. Her life. Before she could formulate a response, the back door of the diner swung open with a soft groan. One of Hollis's men, the younger one with cold eyes, stood silhouetted against the fading afternoon light. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Hollis's gaze didn't leave Christina's face. He's still here. In the alley. The bus doesn't leave for another hour. He paused, letting the information settle. You don't have to see him. My men will put him on that bus, whether you do or not. But if you have something left to say, now is the time. Christina's heart, which had begun to settle, launched into a frantic rhythm against her ribs. See him? Face him? The very idea sent a primal chill through her veins. For 2 years, facing George meant submission, meant calibrating her words and her posture to minimize the explosion. It meant making herself small. But the man across from her wasn't suggesting she face George alone. He was offering her a new kind of facing, from a place of safety, from a place of power she'd never had. I'm afraid, she admitted, the truth sharp and clean. I know, Hollis said. But you're not afraid of him right now. You're afraid of the ghost of him, the memory, the power he had. He tilted his head. Go look at the reality, see what he is without his audience, without his grip on you, then decide if the ghost is worth carrying anymore. It was the last push she needed. She nodded, once. Hollis stood, smoothing his suit jacket. He didn't offer his hand, didn't touch her. He simply moved to the end of the booth, creating a path. I'll be right behind you. You say the word and we come back inside. This is for you, not for him. Christina slid out, her legs feeling unsteady but holding. She walked toward the back door, the eyes of the diner patrons flickering to her briefly before darting away, unsure of the protocol. The door was heavier than she expected. She pushed it open. The alley was a narrow canyon of brick and dumpsters, smelling of stale grease and sun-warmed garbage. The golden hour light cut across the pavement, illuminating the scene with a stark, theatrical clarity. George sat slumped against the wall, not far from where he'd been earlier. He looked diminished. His leather jacket was scuffed with alley grime. His good hand cradled the splinted wreck of his wrist against his chest. His face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. When the door opened, he flinched, shrinking back like a beaten dog expecting another kick. Then he saw it was her. His eyes, red-rimmed and bloodshot, widened. A flicker of his old, familiar anger sparked there, the indignation that she would see him like this. But it died almost instantly, smothered under a wave of pure, animal fear as his gaze shot past her to where Hollis stood, a silent, dark sentinel in the doorway. Christina took 3 steps forward. The distance felt enormous, 10 feet of cracked asphalt that represented the chasm between her past and her future. She stopped, her back straight, hands loose at her sides. She didn't recognize her own voice when she spoke. It was low, steady, and utterly calm. Look at me, George. His eyes, which had been fixed on Hollis, dragged reluctantly to hers. The hatred was still there, but it was muted, drowned in a sea of terror and pathetic self-pity. You broke my rib, she said, not as an accusation, but as a simple recitation of fact. You gave me a concussion when you slammed my head against the car door. You called me worthless so many times I started to believe it. You made me afraid of my own phone ringing. You stole 2 years of my life. George opened his mouth, perhaps to deny, to justify, to spin. But a subtle shift in the shadow by the door made him snap it shut again. He remained silent, trembling. I used to lie awake at night, she continued, the words flowing now from a deep, clean well of truth she'd capped for years, trying to figure out what I did to deserve it. What was so wrong with me that love had to feel like that? I thought if I just was quieter, cleaner, smarter, more attentive, you'd be the man you were in the beginning. A single, choked sob escaped him. It wasn't remorse. It was the sound of a trapped creature. But that man never existed, Christina said, and with the words, she felt the last chain holding that particular ghost snap. That was the bait. This, she gestured at him, crumpled and broken against the brick, is the trap, and I'm finally out of it. She took one more step forward. Not to threaten, but to be absolutely clear. To let him see her eyes. You listen to me now, because you have no choice. You will get on that bus. You will never come back to this city. You will never contact me. Not a text, not an email, not a message through a friend. You will erase me from your life as completely as you tried to erase me from mine. George's breath hitched. Chris, please. You don't understand what he's done. What he's going to do. I don't care. The ice in her voice surprised even her. Your consequences are yours to carry. Just like the memories are mine to carry. But I'm done letting them define me. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not a monster, but a weak, cruel, small man who had tried to build himself up by tearing her down. The fear that had lived in her marrow for years began to dissolve, replaced by a vast, weary pity. "I don't hate you, George," she said, and it was true. Hate would have meant he still had a hold. "I just want you gone. Forever." She turned then, her message delivered. She didn't wait for a response. There was nothing he could say that mattered. As she walked back toward the door, toward Hollis's imposing silhouette, she felt lighter. The ghost was still there, in the alley with the man who'd created it. She was leaving it behind. Hollis moved aside to let her pass back into the diner. Before she crossed the threshold, she heard George's voice, a broken whisper meant for Hollis. "You win. Just make it stop." Hollis's reply was so quiet, Christina almost missed it. She already did. Then the door swung shut, cutting off the alley, the stench, the wreck of her past. Inside, the familiar diner air felt different, cleaner. The buzz of the fluorescents was just a sound, not a nerve-jangling irritant. She walked back to the booth on legs that felt surer with every step. Hollis rejoined her a moment later, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask how she felt. He simply observed. Christina slid into her seat, her breath coming in one long, slow exhalation. "It's done." "Yes," he agreed. She looked at him, really looked at the man who had, in the span of an hour, reshaped her world. The sharp planes of his face, the dark ink creeping above his collar, the eyes that had seen too much violence but had just watched her reclaim herself with a quiet intensity that felt like respect. "Thank you," she said. "Not for breaking the wrist, or for the threats in the alley. For letting me do that. For being the wall at my back so I could finally speak." A profound softness touched his eyes. There, and gone, in a blink. It was the look he'd given her when she'd said fear didn't impress her anymore. A look of recognition. "You didn't need a wall, Christina," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You just needed the room to stand up. You did the rest." For the first time in 2 years, 7 months, and 13 days, Christina Bradley believed it. The belief was a fragile, budding thing, but it was real. She had faced the monster, and she had walked away, not as a victim fleeing, but as a woman choosing her own direction. The waitress, moving with renewed nervous energy, approached their booth. "Can I, get you folks anything else? Pie? More coffee?" Christina looked at the woman's kind, worried face and smiled. A genuine, unburdened smile that felt strange on her lips. "No," she said. "I think I'm finally full." The diner door chimed softly behind them as they stepped out into the evening. The harsh Arizona sun had mellowed into a deep, burnished gold, painting the parking lot in long shadows and warm light. The world looked the same cracked asphalt, the same distant hum of highway traffic, but it felt irrevocably different. Christina's beat-up sedan sat where she'd left it, a lonely island in the sea of pickup trucks and work vans. She fished the keys from her pocket, the metal warm from her skin. The simple act felt weighted with new meaning. She was going to her car. She was going to drive home. And for the first time, the thought didn't conjure a phantom image of George waiting in the back seat. Hollis walked beside her, maintaining that careful, respectful distance. His presence was no longer that of a stranger, but of a silent guardian. The violence of the afternoon was a closed book. The man beside her now was all contained potency and unsettling calm. They reached her car. She turned to face him, the keys clenched tightly in her fist. The words she needed to say felt too small, too inadequate for the debt she felt. "I don't know how to repay you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is no debt," Hollis interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This wasn't a transaction, but you upended your entire day. You made enemies. For me, a woman you don't know." "I know enough." He echoed his words from earlier, but the meaning had deepened. He knew her strength now. He'd witnessed her courage. That, to him, was everything. He reached into the inner pocket of his impeccably tailored suit jacket and withdrew not a business card, but a simple, thick, matte black card. No name, no title, just a 10-digit number printed in stark, silver numerals. "My direct line," he said, offering it to her. "It's answered 24 hours a day, by me or by someone I trust with my life. If you need anything, if you're afraid, if he so much as breathes your name in a different state, if a man looks at you wrong and it makes your skin crawl, it doesn't matter the reason, you call." Christina stared at the card as if it were a loaded weapon. In a way, it was. It was a conduit to a power she didn't understand, a world of shadows and absolutes. Taking it felt like crossing a final threshold. Her fingers trembled as she accepted it. The card was cool and substantial. Day or night, she echoed his unspoken promise. Day or night, he confirmed, his dark eyes holding hers. The protection I've extended isn't conditional, and it isn't temporary. As long as I'm breathing, no one touches you again. That is a promise, Christina. Not a threat to you, a promise to the world. The sheer scale of the vow stole her breath. It wasn't romantic. It was feudal. It was the oath of a king to a subject, a god to a devotee. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like the first full, deep breath she'd taken in years. Tears pricked her eyes again, but they weren't tears of fear or grief. They were tears of a relief so profound it was dizzying. The weight she had carried alone for so long was now shared by someone who could not only bear it, but annihilate anything that tried to add to it. I believe you, she said, and the words were a covenant of their own. A ghost of that rare, genuine smile touched his lips. Good. He took a single step back, giving her space to open her car door, to leave. The gesture was deliberate. He was demonstrating that his protection didn't mean possession. She was free to go. Christina unlocked the door, the sound loud in the quiet parking lot. She paused, one hand on the frame, and looked back at him. The Mafia boss in the $1,000 suit, standing in a dusty diner lot, watching over her with an intensity that could level cities. Will I see you again? She asked, surprised by the flicker of something that wasn't fear at the thought. Hollis's gaze was unwavering. That's up to you. This diner is neutral ground. I'm here most Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you want to talk, if you want to just eat a meal without looking over your shoulder. He paused. The choice is always yours. She nodded, understanding the profound gift he was offering. Not just safety, but autonomy. The power to choose her own next step. Thank you, Hollis, she said, putting his name to the power and the kindness for the first time. Drive safe, Christina. She slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of old upholstery and air freshener welcoming her. She placed the black card carefully in the empty cup holder, where it gleamed under the dashboard lights. As she started the engine, she saw in her rearview mirror that he hadn't moved. He stood, hands in his pockets, a statue of unwavering vigilance, watching until she was gone. She pulled out of the lot and onto the main road. In the mirror, his figure grew smaller, then disappeared as she turned a corner. She was alone in the car, alone with the hum of the engine and the vast, terrifying freedom of the open road ahead. But she didn't feel alone. Back in the parking lot, Hollis Montano remained until the sound of her engine had faded completely into the dusk. The softness that had touched his features when she smiled hardened back into its usual granite planes. But his eyes held a new, simmering purpose. He turned and looked toward the alley where his men had deposited George Alex. The man would be on a bus by now, shaking and broken, headed for a life of small-town obscurity and constant, gnawing fear. It was a punishment worse than death for a man like that, a life of irrelevance, of knowing he'd been utterly and permanently erased from the story of the woman he'd tried to own. It was sufficient. For now, Hollis's phone buzzed discreetly in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, a status update confirming George was aboard the Greyhound, already 20 miles out, and dismissed it. His gaze lifted, scanning the horizon where Christina's car had vanished. The protective fury that had ignited in him hours ago hadn't cooled. It had settled. It had metamorphosed from a fire into a foundation, a new, immovable pillar in the architecture of his life. Protect Christina Bradley. The directive was simple, absolute. It would mean adjustments. It would mean his enemies learning there was a line that, if crossed, would result not in business-like retaliation, but in personal annihilation. It would mean ensuring her world remained soft and safe, while he stood guard in the hard shadows around it. He pulled out his own car keys, the sleek fob of a dark, expensive sedan parked in the shadows. But he didn't move toward it immediately. He looked back at the diner, its fluorescent glow spilling out onto the pavement like a pool of sanctuary. His sanctuary, and now, perhaps hers. A thin, cold smile finally touched his lips. It was the smile of a man who had just redefined his purpose. The empire, the deals, the territory, they were just mechanisms, tools. This was a reason. He slid into his car, the interior silent and tomb-like. He started the engine, a low, powerful purr, one last look in the direction she had gone, his expression dark, deliberate, and full of a terrifying certainty. Then Hollis Montano drove away, leaving the diner behind, his promise hanging in the twilight air, a silent, unbreakable vow etched not in paper, but in blood and will, at all costs. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.
Родители, если есть, которые друзья поддержат тебя в какой-то момент, хотя бы просто отвлекут тебя от этих мыслей. А если у тебя, к примеру, там семья, жена, к примеру, да, есть дети, то тут, наверное, поддержка только от них исходит какая-то. Вот. Чтобы не упиваться в своих мыслях о том, что какая нынче сложная жизнь. И, наверное, других-то вариантов, в принципе-то, и нету. Какие вот еще варианты, в принципе, изменить, поменять свою жизнь настолько, чтобы она была, ну, казалась тебе удачной, да, реализованным себя в жизни, в чем-то. В чем, вот как проявляется на самом деле у нас реализованность? Наверное, у 90% случаев это финансовое благополучие, финансовая независимость. Это, наверное, одно из таких ключевых моментов, когда человек, наверное, считает себя реализованным, да, в этой жизни. То есть, как добиться этого? То есть, с учетом того, что даже возьмем нашу страну, да, сколько миллионов людей здесь живет, как каждому добиться этого результата? Непонятно. И с каждым годом просто ситуация становится все хуже и хуже. Все дорожает, люди зарабатывают либо столько же. Ну, даже если они зарабатывают столько же, на самом деле этого все уже недостаточно. К чему это все приведет на самом деле? В оконцове, наверное, мир погрязнет в большую депрессию в какую-то. Какие-то войны, возможно, или еще что-то еще больше глобальных таких вещей, которые не приведут ни к чему хорошему на самом деле. Поддержка каждого человека именно для того, чтобы он держался, наверное, морально, заключается в том, что, ну, наверное, дом, в который ты приходишь, должен быть крепостью твоей, да, что это единственное должно быть место, где ты будешь чувствовать себя под защитой. Для этого было придумано, наверное, своя пещера изначально, потом свои какие-то чумы, палатки различные, да, потом все это превратилось, на данный момент это у нас дома, квартиры, в которые мы приходим и должны ощущать себя в безопасности, чтобы можно быть немного морально расслабленным с учетом того, что ты выходишь каждый день на работу, на улицу, и все равно давление вот это вот, оно все присутствует. Когда ты заходишь в магазин, видишь цены эти, да, и так далее, не можешь себе что-то там приобрести, позволить на ежедневной основе, это откладывает большой, наверное, отпечаток. Не, наверное, а точно. И поэтому, когда возвращаясь домой, ты чувствуешь, вот хотя бы есть типа уголок того места, куда ты можешь прийти. Уголок на самом деле человеку много тоже не надо. Можно хотеть большего, но на самом деле человеку одному много не надо. Да? Ему нужно спальное место, спокойное место, где можно подумать. Ну, это когда ты один, к примеру, да? Когда у тебя есть семья, к примеру, ты приходишь домой, опять-таки, тут хотя бы, да, поговорить о каких-то вещах. Просто об отрешенных вещах, наверное. И, возможно, при этих же условиях у тебя и появляется какая-то дополнительная мотивация для реализации себя. А когда у тебя нету ничего, вот это уже становится проблемой. И это у многих на самом деле. Что значит не иметь ничего? Тут, наверное, самое главное, дизмораль у человека еще возникает при том, что это уже, наверное, где-то в глубине души даже она возникает при даже хорошей финансовой подушке такой, которая у тебя есть, хороших финансовых деньгах, да, то есть, но нету вот внутреннего ощущения, к примеру, дружбы, семьи, любви и так далее. Это уже отдельно на самом деле разговор, потому что мы, вот, к примеру, можем взять, как сейчас вот Мелстрой, если кто-то смотрит, насколько тяжело обладать такими финансами и не иметь, по сути, ничего. Ни друзей, ничего не иметь. Так главное это получается для бедных главное деньги, для богатых главное какое-то внутреннее ощущение нужности, не из-за денег. Вот такое вот. И это борьба какая-то такая и вот эти два слоя общества, богатые и бедные, они друг друга не понимают. На самом деле из-за этого, возможно. Потому что богатый человек, он уже не смотрит на деньги, он не считает эти деньги. Ему важно внутреннее вот это вот ощущение того, что он нужен без них даже. Это как Тони Старку сказали: а кто ты без костюма? На вот это я филантроп, тудым-сюдым, он сказал, да? Так и человеку, у которого много денег, ты задашь вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Ну, что ты представляешь себе без денег? Вот и это, наверное, возможно, таких людей богатых, как вот, например, там Мелстрой, задав ему этот вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Он на него ответить-то и не сможет. Обратная сторона людей бедных, да, вот если мы посмотрим, человеку